Because me and my friends talk about this sometimes. I've invested in lots of companies there, and the founders come to me and ask me these kinds of questions, which is based on everything that's going on with this turmoil and the big cycle. What's going to happen if I continue to build my company here in the United Kingdom?
I think the United Kingdom, as it goes through these difficulties, is as a whole a more difficult place. And then there are pockets of it that, when they're operating, are in their pockets, very stimulative, having those elements. Just like in the United States, there are places and pockets that have those. However, they're within a system and a place that is not healthy.
The real dominant narrative we're seeing, as I said this week, is that because there's this problem, you said there's not enough money, the most popular narrative, which I think is supported by about 70% of people, is that people over 10 million net worth, this is something proposed by one of my former guests, Gary Stevenson, who did a documentary last week, should have a 2% wealth tax.
My preferred way is to stop people from hoarding enormous amounts of wealth for enormous amounts of time. That's basically my preferred method. There's also the wealth tax method. There's also capital gains as a method. There's a lot of different ways here. But you have to deal with the problem of, if you do not tax very wealthy individuals and very wealthy families, their share of the pie will obviously grow over time, and they are, as we are watching, squeezing out ordinary families.
And this is it would raise, I think they said $20 billion or something like that, but it would raise some money. So the big debate in the country at the moment is, one way to raise money would be this wealth tax. Proponents of that, or I should say, people that are against that, say people will leave.
If you took all of the money of people in the top, not, in other words, taxed at 100%, you're not going to come up with enough money, because it's such a small percentage of the population. But in addition, yes, the people will leave. Then you change the laws so that you make them retroactive. In other words, you say the law means you're going to be taxed as of a past date, so that if you leave, we're going to get your money. Or then you put in capital controls. All of this has happened before. Wealth taxes would be new. Wealth taxes are administratively difficult, because how do you value all this wealth that is not easily valued in such things? But yes, what you've just said is well recognized.
You mentioned earlier that this big cycle takes place, this one here on the front of your book, The Changing World Order, happens roughly every 80 years.
Yes, it's like health. What I mean is, it varies. On average, let's say, what is the life expectancy of a person? But life expectancies, or how long people live, vary. I wouldn't emphasize too much the amount of time exactly, as much as I would look at your condition.
Where are we in this at the moment, in terms of the symptoms or markers of the next big collapse?
We're over in this vicinity over here. We're on the, when we say that, the U.S., the U.K., number of other countries are later in that cycle, when there's the loss of the things that we've been talking about, over-indebtedness, more over-indebtedness, the loss of power.
So we're in the collapse period of the decline.
Yeah, the decline. I'll call that the decline.
And you've studied this for how long? In terms of
500 years, the cycles for 500 years, and in a number of countries. It's in that book. These are objective measures. This is not subjectivity. You can measure these things. You can measure the level of indebtedness. You can measure the education levels and the competitiveness. You can measure all these things in clearly measurable numbers that show the health, just like a physical exam.
When there's a new world order because of this decline, through history over the last 500 years, has there ever been two superpowers that emerge as the dominant superpowers? Or is it just tends to be one?
In the past, prior to World War I, there was no World War I happened, and then World War II happened, because the world came together and there was one world, essentially. Before that, there were regions, and they would have the different powers, and you could have a powerful China or India could be very powerful at the same time as the UK or the Dutch and whatever would be powerful, and they weren't in that one world. And the basic issue is when you have one world and you have disagreements, you're always going to have disagreements. How do you resolve those disagreements?
War.
War. Okay. Maybe it's not physical war, maybe it's whatever it is, but there's a disagreement. Where does the border lie? Where does this, okay. The rules-based order is a theoretical conception of the United States coming out of World War II, because there's the idea of how do you govern, and you have representatives, and you have them in the United Nations, and so on. And that's a nice theory, but the reality is when that comes in is inconsistent with power, which wins, power or that rule-based system? So by nature, to answer your question, it tends to be a dominant power. We will see. China and I think the United States, I think the most likely beneficial outcome is that it becomes more regional. Okay. China has no desire to occupy, control other countries for various cultural reasons and things that I can go into. And their basic objective is to not be cut off, not be harmed, and then also be as good as they can be and be competitive, following their approach to a system, which is very much a top-down controlled system that's an extension of Confucianism, which is like the family, and that's what they want to do. You can possibly have this region thing, but you're not going to have the dominant world power. If that's the case, you have some chance that there's a great conflict, but I think that there's enough wisdom, in a sense, to not want to go there.
So there's pretty much always been a superpower through different cycles. There's been one dominant power through these historical cycles. You're saying that you believe in the next decline, there won't be one dominant power, which has been the US for the last 80 odd years. There will be two, because you can't foresee there being a conflict at the scale that would result in one dominant power.
The strength of each country will be how they take care of themselves. Are they going to be strong, or are they going to be weak based on how they educate their population, how they spend their money, how they manage themselves? Those will determine the relative powers of those countries, right? And so that'll be true certainly for the United States and China. And so as we go forward, how will those systems deal with those issues in the best possible way? And that I would say, as long as the United States remains a power, but it has a risk of having a very bad set of circumstances through debt and conflict and these things that erode it. It'll be from within that those things particularly could change that relative balance of power. And similarly, if China managed itself badly, that could change that. Given that if they both remain powerful entities, then what you're going to see is, I believe, more the recognition that there are regions, okay? Just like there's the Americas, okay? And that becomes heavily much more the region and where that spills over. And then there's the region around China, the APAC countries, and that region, and that there would be the development within those regions. And I do believe the avoidance of the big war that would be very detrimental. There are issues like the Taiwan issue, but the Taiwan issue will be handled by, in my opinion, most likely, not militarily in the sense that there will be a great war between the United States and China over it, but in the pressures that are going to be created so that there is a reunification of China.
You mentioned conflict there. The United States are at war with Iran, and it seems to be a war that they can't seem to get out of. this is going to have an impact, presumably, on lots of things you've described here, but also the feelings of people at home. As you know, we face the prospect of the United States sending troops on the ground into Iran because the Strait of Hormuz is going to become this choke point to global energy, and they're going to, and what does Trump do about that? He can't. It's like Vietnam; he can't leave, or else he is going to look bad. If he stays, he looks bad. Midterms coming up. What's your thoughts on this war in Iran? Do you think it was a bad idea? Do you think it was a good idea? Does it play a role in all of this stuff here? The US police?
This war in Iran, I think here's what's happening. Internationally, I get to speak to world leaders and so on, and particularly in Asia. There's a recognition that the United States doesn't want to fight a war. So the litmus test is, who controls the Strait of Hormuz? And that the United States, because the population in the United States is worried about gas prices and losing people, and they want it to be all over fast, that you can't fight a war that way. And so what you have is the United States will not show up in Asia.
What does that mean, show up in Asia?
In Asia, there are all these countries who believe that the United States was going to play an important role as a counterbalancing influence for power in the region, because China's the dominant power and the others are much less power. And so the United States being in there was going to balance those power. And because they have a military presence, the idea of having bases in their countries was believed to be that will help that happen. Okay, now there's a recognition that not only they won't show up, but maybe these bases can become liabilities, and that the Chinese have a lot of influence and power under that set of circumstances. For example, chips come out of Taiwan. We could imagine what would happen if they blockaded chips leaving Taiwan. Okay, you'd see the world stock markets crash. You would see terrible things. That represents a non-military power, just even the ability to threaten that. Say, the Chinese say, for 5 days, we're not going to have it. What will the United States literally do? Or if you go to countries like the Philippines, which has a treaty with the United States that's like a NATO treaty, well, how would the American public react that we're going to send military, aircraft carriers and so on into the Philippines to stop the Filipinos from being picked on by the Chinese? I mean, so what you're seeing is a change that is very similar to the British Empire in terms of being weaker. I remember a time not long ago that the United States would just have to almost hint to a country that we would like this thing, it to be this way, or you would like it to do that, and they would do it because of the American power, not just military power, but economic power and so on. Well, as you're seeing that power being eroded, for example, China is a larger trading partner with most countries than the United States is, or capital turning up. So these things matter. So you're seeing that kind of a shift in power. I'm a global macro investor, and my goal is to be as accurate as I possibly can. I can't let biases stand in my way of doing that. So I look at statistics and measures and indicators and so on. So what I'm saying is clear. It is, it's apparent. It's mechanics.
So what does that mean for the Iran situation then? Does it mean that
Well, it means that it's a very, very difficult situation. What is all through history, and the Chinese know this very well because their way of having a war is conveyed in the art of war and also the tribute system, as they call it. You cannot easily go in and control a country for a long period of time occupying. There are, 90 million Iranians, and they will be there. No matter what happens, Now the question is, do you have what it takes to take control of the Strait of Hormuz, by way of example, and allow, in other words, do you allow that to be in the hands of the Iranians, or do you not? And are you willing to pay the price to be able to put yourself in the position, which means take a lot of pain and then enforce that for the, I don't know, forever and ever future? Because it's not just take control today. It means, okay, how is that going to go on? And what does that mean in these other locations? Does the United States, they're going to do the same thing with the Chinese in Asia? They're going to do the same thing all around? Probably. Okay. So what does that mean? Okay. A change in the world order.
It sounds like a big mistake.
Oh, yeah. It was a big mistake. And also, what it did is it shone a light on the vulnerability. Before it wasn't apparent.
Vulnerability of?
The United States in being able to enforce. You know, when there's always the threat, we'll come in there, the strait is open, we're not dealing with this, and there's always the threat that the United States will remain in control. And that would be true in Asia and other places. Now a light bulb goes off. In other words, like the British in the Suez Canal, we didn't realize. Now we realize
that threats no longer work.
That power no longer exists.
If you love the Diary of a CEO brand and you watch this channel, please do me a huge favor. Become part of the 15% of the viewers on this channel that have hit the subscribe button. It helps us tremendously, and the bigger the channel gets, the bigger the guests.